I worked at Netflix for a few months from August last year to February this year. It was customer service, so it was basically a hell of elderly people calling for various stupid reasons. One thing that happened constantly was people opening accounts by accident and not closing them. Most often it was an old person who forgot their password, so instead of recovering it, they would just make a new account each time it happened. The policy when I worked there was, if they had watched even a minute of Netflix on an account, we could only refund the last 3 months charged, no matter the age of the account. If they hadn't watched Netflix, we could credit up to 6 months. If they had a single minute of Netflix used in the past month, we were only allowed to credit 1 month. And no refund at all if they tried to cancel within a week of their billing date. We also were told not to refund anything if we weren't explicitly asked for a refund. My last week at that job, I didn't care about their rules much. If someone forgot they paid for Netflix and seemed genuine or like it was a true mistake, I'd just refund as much as the system would allow me to credit, even if it was technically going against our rules, the full 6 months. So one day in that last week, I have some old man calling. He inadvertently made a new account for each device he had for Netflix, so he had like 5 to 6 accounts each with near daily use. He was generally pleasant, so I decided I'd offer him as much as the system would allow instead of the 1 month that we were supposed to do if asked. So I tell him that I can credit back the last 6 months of each of the accounts he wishes to cancel. This causes him to become livid. I've had these effing accounts for over a year and you're going to goddamn refund me the full amount I'm owed. And stuff like that being spewed at me for the next minute or so. Eventually he demands to talk to my manager because he thinks that they will be able to refund him the full amounts. The fun part now is the supervisors followed every rule to the word. So I had the pleasure of getting my supervisor on the line, who ended up telling him that they could only refund a maximum of 1 month per account. So he lost out on 5 months per account of possible refund money, all because he decided to act like a dick and throw a tantrum. Before I was a lawyer, I had an internship and was supervised under a man named Bob, who resented my continued existence in his department and saw me as deadweight. This is largely true of legal interns, who tend to create work rather than solve problems. However, Bob would give me half of an assignment, refuse to clarify his instructions, and then sigh in exasperation when I wasn't able to literally read his mind or solve the issue. If I suggested another or different way to do something, he would dig his heels in, just for the sake of doing so, even on things where taking a hard stance made no sense. One day I was assigned to send a large volume of files to the company's outside lawyers. After gathering documents from various company representatives, I realized that they were too voluminous to email. When I told Bob that I needed to put them on a flash drive, he snapped that they must be submitted via email. Today, I knew that our company would accept emails up to 30 MB from internal sources, but the server would reject anything external over 15 MB, and I suspected the law firm's servers were set up the same way. Bob wouldn't hear it. "What are you talking about? I send huge files all the time. Just do it." "Sure thing, Bob." I confirmed the email size limit with the law firm, then lovingly, painstakingly parsed out the files for individual emails. I waited until Bob was in a meeting and started shotgunning privilege/confidential email 1 of 47 messages to the firm and copying Bob. They emailed me in a panic, begging me to stop and telling me that a flash drive would be great. I told them that, for Bob, the messages must be emailed. Bob eventually sent a very terse reply, instructing the firm to send a courier over so that the flash drive could be picked up. I was at one point one of Best Buy's elite members, having spent thousands there in a short period of time. I made one major return there and didn't think much of it. They didn't say anything other than that they were sorry for selling me a defective TV. Fast forward 6 months. I picked up a new 4K monitor that had a pretty obvious defect immediately, took it back the next day, and they said they could not honor any further returns from me. Upon further prodding, I was told that they use a third party to track returns, and that I had gone over some preset dollar amount returning that TV and they could not and would not budge, even after the Gaia Geek Squad had in fact confirmed the monitor was bad. I escalate to a manager, and it goes like this. "Me, who can I talk to about getting this return done?" GM, no one. Me, that's absurd. It clearly defective, and I bought it yesterday. Can I exchange it at least? GM, no, nothing you can do. Me, this seems pretty anti-consumer. What's the next step here? GM, you could try calling someone who gives a damn. Me, I think I'll do that. I took out my phone and called Amex on speaker, since I paid for the monitor with it, explained to the rep what was going on, and that the GM of the store could hear the conversation if they had any questions for him. The GM confirms his position, and Amex's response was an immediate $500 plus TAX chargeback to Best Buy. The GM's face went completely red with anger, and he went full rage mode, yelling at me that I needed to leave and not come back. I just politely smiled and told him I only did exactly what he asked me to do. P.S. That third-party company is Retail Equation, and there are multiple class action lawsuits against them. This is my dad's story, and it's a short one. My dad was 14 and his fairly muscular older brother, my uncle, was 16. My uncle was flexing his abs and said to my dad, "Punch me as hard as you can." My dad then proceeded to punch him as hard as he could in the face. In the 1990s, although the Cold War had been winding down, Germany still enforced conscription. It's still on the books today, but not enforced anymore. Not everyone had to serve, as the army had been reduced in size, so only about 50% of the young men of any year had to go in the end. I was one of the lucky young men going through medical checks, assorted testing procedures, and got a first taste of life in the military, namely, procedures for procedures' sake and lots of administrative bullfesses. So I decided to refuse service with the armed forces, a perfectly legal choice, extending my time to serve from 12 to 15 months and earning the job title of Zivildienstleister, somebody doing public service, short, Zivvy. So 18-year-old me ended up in a local hospital, doing general assistance, fetching patients for their treatments, etc., until they told me I'd be transferred to the psychiatric ward to help there. They even included a reminder that under the conscription laws I had no right to refuse that posting. Not that I had any intention of refusing, but I really looked forward to doing actual work with long-term patients. But this legal reminder got me thinking, if they were so eager for me to follow the rules, certainly they'd do the same. The rules stated explicitly that Zivs were only allowed in assistance roles, were never to replace, but only augment trained healthcare personnel, and had to receive mandatory training before dealing with certain types of tasks, for instance patients with psychiatric disorders. The first day at the psychiatric ward came and went, really nice ward. The nurses were really friendly and happy to have me, low on trained staff. So I was to replace a fully trained nurse, and they told me about the mandatory training, which I neither had nor found in my schedule in the near future. So I, following the rules, inquired at the regional Kreisverwaltungsamt office in charge of all the Zivs in a region about that training, and they didn't have me on the schedule either. By law, I was required to inquire there whether a tasking required additional training. The very next day the head of nursing, Pflegedienstleiter, furiously called me into his office, asked whether I had been in contact with the guys at QI, because he had just received a fax referring to my call and ordering mandatory scheduled trainings for all 40 plus Zivs at the hospital, between 2 and 4 weeks each, depending on their respective tasks. Apparently, they had always forgotten to notify QI of special training requirements, thereby increasing the amount of time they could use us as cheap labor. Hourly rate was approximate 2 Deutschmarks to $1.20. The guy was livid. I had robbed him of nearly 120 weeks, combined, of slave labor, just by following regulations he seemed to be so keen to point out. His last sentence was the famous one, "He who laughs last." So after completing my 4 weeks of training, I returned to work in the psych ward, only to be reassigned nearly randomly. Thorax surgery, intensive care, neurology. A few weeks here, a few days there. He thought he'd punished me, but to me, it was a great adventure, getting to know so many aspects of medicine. So he took the last tool he had available. He forced me to live on site. This last one actually was part of the laws intended for army conscripts, not civils. Nevertheless, it also applied to me. He ordered me to live on site, not to go home after work as every other civvy there was allowed to do, so I complied. He actually made me live in the dorm of the hospital's nursing school, filled with nubile young ladies aged 16 to 20, and I was the only male there. Oh, the horror. I have worked in aviation for nearly 20 years, from small airports to large commercial hubs. Like any industry, it is full of type A personalities and those promoted up to their respective level of incompetence. To protect those involved, I will not name the airport or the company I worked for. At the time this story occurred, I had worked my way up in a company that is contracted to pump the fuel into the aircraft at one of the busiest airports in the US. My job was the supervisor in charge fuel quality and safety adherences. The airport I worked at was growing. It went from middle of the pack to being in the top 10 for total operations in about 3 years. As such, there was, and still is, a lot of construction going on in order to have more gates and parking areas. This has involved restriping the gates and adding more jet bridges onto the existing terminal. This usually is a pain, but works for the most part when there is only so much room to work with. For fueling, a hydrant system is commonly used. It is far faster and more convenient than having tanker trucks go up to every plane. Instead, a piece of equipment is staged at each gate and hooks up to a pit in the ground, where fuel is delivered directly from the storage tanks and can be pumped to the plane. These are large underground pipes, and once in place are rarely, if ever, moved. If you move your gate, that pit stays put and isn't as conveniently located as it first was. Might be too far away from the plane, might be under the plane, etc. When the airport authority decided to add a new gate at the end of a terminal, I was invited to the meeting thanks to my position. I guess I was expected to just sit and nod or something, since every time I pointed out that the new gate would put the pit under the jet or on the wrong side, I was basically told we will make it work, or this is the only way we can do it. After being shut down a few times, I gave up. 4 months of construction to expand the passenger waiting area and attach a jet bridge brings us to the first day of use. There is a ribbon cutting ceremony and the first arrival is brought into the gate. The fueler calls me because he doesn't like how he had to run his hoses and wants me to sign off on his solution. I pull up and see that the pit is under the left engine. 737 fuel panel is on the right wing, so he has to run the pit hose under the fuselage, which is full of passengers. This hose is a 3-inch in diameter and is capable of delivering around 800 gallons per minute. Equipment slows that down as appropriate per aircraft. Should a tug or anything hit that line, it will get bad and fast. I say there is no way we can use that pit and there isn't another one to choose from. I advise the airline and they say use a truck then. I responded, we can't. The jet is within 20 feet of a wall of the terminal and we can't get a truck in front. If we are behind the jet, we will block the taxi lane and no aircraft are getting in or out of 8 gates. We can't safely fuel an aircraft at this gate. Well, you can imagine how this went over. Within 15 minutes I have the highest level person in town for the airline, the airport duty manager, who brought a couple of airport police with him for some reason, my GM, and the manager for the baggage loaders all at the gate. I explain the issue and state that I will not allow fueling as it isn't safe to run pressurized jet fuel under an aircraft, and that the pit is underneath the engine itself. Both of these violate numerous regulations. My GM looks at it and agrees. The airline head starts yelling, and the duty manager says he will have the fire department come look, and if they say it is good, we are responsible to fuel. Fire battalion chief comes up, hears the issue and walks over to look. He then gets a rolling wheel measure and walks it from the pit to the building, and then back to his truck. He comes back with a red tag, and puts the pit permanently out of service as it was too close to the building. He tells everyone that as he sees it, there is no way to legally fuel at that gate as it is too close to the building and the fuel truck would block a fire escape path. For the next 2 months the airline used the gate as overflow with no fuel, meaning they had to bring the plane in with enough fuel already, or fuel it out on a cargo stand. Then, it was cordoned off and demolished, and then old lines were restored. Not sure how many millions that cost, but it had to be a few. My manager has started to send us a daily list of what he believes are the top priority tasks for that day, in priority order. He regularly asks us what we are doing throughout the day, and if it's not something on his list, he's not happy. However, his priority list doesn't cover customer calls or unexpected high severity issues. It's mainly issues he wants done. We've had a particularly busy day today, and every time he's asked me about my priority tasks, I've not been doing them due to volume of calls. So after the 5th time of asking, followed by a passive-aggressive email which the managing director was included in reminding us to stick to the daily priority list, I've decided to do just that. We've just had a very important customer contact us with an urgent request, which I haven't actioned. I've just been asked why, and my response: it's not on my priority list. He asked me if I was joking, when it was obvious I wasn't. He went back to his desk. We were sent a revised email which said all requests from list of important customers marked urgent should take precedence over any task set by management. If you enjoyed the stories, slap the like and subscribe button for more of them, and don't forget to support the original writers with an upvote. Links are in the description. Peace out, and catch you tomorrow.